So can I have a show of hands in the room? Who's a physician? Please put your hand up. Who's a physician? Physician, okay. Thank you. And who's a psychologist? No psychologists? Oh, what a pity. And physical therapists? Okay. A nurse? Any other profession? Okay. Oh, okay, so what are you? Okay, thank you, occupational therapist. So think about a situation you may have had in your clinic in your daily clinic many times before. Doesn't matter which profession you belong to. You have a patient in your clinic and you are instructing an exercise. So, and then you give some advice, you give some information on daily life or maybe on posture or something like that. And you send the patient home with this exercise and information. And then a few days later, the patient is showing up in your clinic again, and a colleague of you is just checking the exercises. And you wonder, what is that doing? Okay, are you sure about that? Your colleague told me that. And you think, really? And you may experience this many times in your life. And at some point, you really ask yourself, do patients hear what therapists say? Do they actually understand what we tell them? So, looking at the literature, what we know about communication between physical therapists and patients is that physical therapists talk a lot. So twice as much as the patients, mostly. And they tend to interrupt the patients quite often. We just from our profession and from our attitude, we want our patients to exercise. So it's one of our wishes, really, we want to exercise. We want our patients to exercise. But we are somehow struggling with involving patients. So patients in some other research on communication are a little bit complaining about that. I was not that much involved in the whole situation. And a study from Denmark showed that we are worse with the older patients and with chronic patients compared to the younger ones and the more acute ones when it comes to the delivery of information, of explanations, for example. So we looked at all this in our clinic together with my friend Wolfgang, and to get an answer on the question, do patients actually understand what we tell them in the first evaluation? And we didn't come up with an answer. The literature didn't provide us with an answer. There's a lot of research on adherence, so how good our patients are doing exercise we tell them, and is adherence connected to outcomes? Yes, it is. But there's no evidence or no research on the initial step. So the initial step, day one, you see a patient in your clinic and you tell the patient some information, you give some information or you give some exercises, but how successful is this delivery? So we decided to run a research project on that. So what have we done? We decided to focus on low back pain patients, just to have a homogeneous population. And most research on communication is done with low back pain patients. So we went for this group. So after the initial evaluation, right after the initial evaluation, the patient received a questionnaire. And the patient had to state which information / exercise did the therapist give to you? And how relevant do you think this information or exercise is for you? Okay, so and we used a Likert scale from completely irrelevant to very relevant or highly relevant. So we wanted to know, do patients remember what the therapist told them just a few minutes ago, actually? It was in the clinic. And we gave the same or comparable questionnaire to the therapist. So we asked him, which exercise / information did you provide? And what do you think, how successful has been the delivery? And we asked both patients and therapists also, were your expectations fulfilled? We asked the therapist, were your goals for today fulfilled? So and then we compared these questionnaires and looked for discrepancies. We wanted to know, do patients hear what therapists say to them or tell them? So in total, we had a set of a complete set of data of 90 patients and 90 questionnaires and patients and therapists. And we involved 25 therapists in this research, 4 clinics in Freiburg and 1 hospital in Switzerland. So think about this question. Think about this research question. Do you think that patients hear what we tell them? Yes or no? Who thinks yes, they hear what we say? Okay. Oh, that's disappointing. Who thinks no? Many of you don't think at all, it looks like. Okay. Or maybe you're just shy. So our hypothesis was, we think it doesn't work that well. So patients may not hear what we tell them because from our experience from the last 25, 30 years being physical therapists and looking at the literature, we think that there's a mismatch. So here are the results from the questionnaires first. So we looked at if a patient gets one advice, so the first advice. We just looked at the advices that were written down by patients and therapists. And we looked, if a patient gets one advice, how many patients do actually understand this, are able to recite it on a piece of paper after the evaluation. If one advice is given, 100% of patients were able to tell about this advice. So we call advice information and exercise, piece of advice. And that was surprising. So we looked if a second information or exercise was given, still 92% remembered the information/exercise. And then we had a drop if 3 informations were given in a row or together, so only 2/3 were remembered by the patients. So 1/3 could not remember the exercise or information. So it was not enough just asking, can you hear it? Can you write it down? We also wanted to know, do you think it's relevant what this therapist gave to you? And so we looked at the relevance, at the Likert scale. And what we found here was first advice. Almost everybody found it either relevant or very relevant. And no one said that's irrelevant or highly irrelevant. Second advice, we had the same, 97. And even for the third advice, 97% said that's relevant or highly relevant, very relevant for me. So that is quite a good result. So looking at this, first, second, and third advice, we have a drop. But think about reality. Think about this is a pragmatic study. It's business as usual. It was done in usual physical therapy clinics with a limited time frame for the initial evaluation. So we thought that's quite a good number. So 100% one exercise slash information, 2 exercise still 92, and then there's a drop. So our initial hypothesis was somehow not confirmed from this part. So now we decided to run the interviews to find out why is this working? Why is communication working under these circumstances? Because we didn't expect it to be that. So we invited 14 patients for the interviews. After 14 interviews, we reached a so-called data saturation, so no additional information was achieved. That is always kind of subjective in a qualitative study, because you don't know if maybe if we would have done 30 or 40, some new information would have been shown up, but that's life, you have to make a cut at some point. So after 14 interviews, we said, it looks like we're getting the same information consistently from patients. We did the interviews either in the clinic or via telephone. In an optimal way, it was done the next day, or at least in the next 6 days. So there was no interview done later than 6 days after the initial evaluation. We did run a framework analysis on these interviews. So we checked for special topics, themes, sub-themes, and so we ended up with 4 themes, which might help to explain why communication did work under these circumstances. Theme number 1 was the type of assessment. What does it mean?
Wie ging's mit dem Therapeuten?
Gut, also ich habe keine Sorge, was ich habe. Und wir haben die Übungen zusammen miteinander ausgearbeitet und probiert.
So what we found consistently was that patients were really appreciating that they were allowed to report extensively. I could say what I have. We had enough time to talk about this. So patients really appreciated this aspect of the assessment. And look at this. So as you can see, there is one word in bold. It's the we. And that is what we found in many interviews. Patients were really emphasizing the fact that we did, we moved, I moved, and then we decided. It was a lot of we in this. So what we found was a lot of this joint assessment, doing an assessment together. So what we also found is this active clinical exam was highly appreciated. The patients were talking about, I moved, and I did this, then I changed this. So a lot of activity was going on, not just diagnosing and putting a label on a patient. So you might call this kind of shared decision making. And shared decision making, and I'll come back to this later, is quite en vogue. There's a lot of studies out there in the last few years on shared decision making in medicine, but it's mainly on the therapeutic process, on management. In our study, we found that shared decision making was highly appreciated by patients in the diagnostic process. The second theme was exercises. So,
wie ging es denn mit den Übungen? Die Übungen sind einfach, ich konnte mir das ganz gut merken und vor allen Dingen auch in den Alltag gut einbauen.
And this statement actually summarizes a lot of findings we had in the interviews. So the exercises should be simple, and I have to easily include them in my daily life. They should be in fact effective, and it should be a small number. And I will come back to that on the conclusion. So this was what we found on exercises. And then we were interested in worries about the back, which is a quite common finding when you look at low back pain population.
Machen Sie sich eigentlich Sorgen um Ihren Rücken?
Ja, schon, weil der Schmerz kommt und geht und ich weiß nicht, was da los ist.
Okay, so we found it a lot. Patients were worried about their back. And what we found, in many cases, these worries were influenced by the experience of others. So patients were talking about, there's a story of my neighbor, he ended up in a wheelchair, or here it is the brother-in-law. And patients were highly anxious about imaging. So some patients showed up with an MRI, for example. I have this disc prolapse, so how should this go on? So worries about back pain, we found a lot. And we found that it's very helpful to approach these worries. What we also found in this context of worries about back pain was that the poor prognosis these patients give themselves, and funny enough, not funny, but interesting enough, in some cases, patients emphasize that the type of assessment, coming back to the first theme, helped them to reduce the worries. So one patient, for example, was reporting, and we did all these movements, and I know I have a disc prolapse, but I was not worse afterwards. I haven't moved that much in the last few months as in this examination, but I'm not worse, which gives me actually a good feeling for the future. So an active type of assessment can actually reduce fear and can reduce worries. We should think about that therapy starts with the diagnostic process, with the initial evaluation. And the fourth theme was expectation. That was a typical statement. Mostly people expected some kind of solution, some kind of information, some kind of explanation of the causality. So we always ask the question, so what is your goal today? What do you expect from this session today? I'd like if you could give me an idea what's wrong with my back, what's going on in my back. And the idea of getting exercises, almost every patient was emphasizing this. And interestingly, some patients stated that was different. I expected something different, but I think what I got now was quite good. Some said I expected just exercises, but I received a lot of questioning and involvement in this assessment, but I think it was a good idea. Conclusion. So looking at these four themes, our research question was, do patients understand what therapists say? And at this point with this study, which has a lot of limitations, of course, I can talk about this later, has a lot of limitations, but with this knowledge from this study, we would say, yes, they do understand what we tell them, what we say them, if the assessment is interactive. There's a lot of involvement in the process. If we are not running an assessment on the patient, if we're running it with the patient. And the idea, or maybe the aspect of the kind of examination, in most cases it was a McKenzie examination, so we used repeated movements. 86% of all patients were evaluated by MDT trained, mechanical diagnosis and therapy, trained therapists. So the way of how we did the examination, including a lot of movements, repeated movements, might help in this way. So I come back to the term shared decision making. So that is actually not all woke anymore. You should not go and say, take it or leave it. It's more about, together, let's have a look at your diagnosis, and then we can have a look what does actually make sense for you. And shared decision making in the diagnostic process, which was highly appreciated by the patients. And we think it's kind of it's an under-researched topic yet. Then we have the exercises. And this is not new, actually. There's a lot of research out there on exercises, that you should not give plenty of exercises. And our study confirms that 2 to 3 exercises might be a good number, exercise/information. It's not about giving a bunch of exercises. It's more making it very clear, together with the patient, which exercise really makes sense. And an active assessment can reduce fear. If we move the patients, instead of just palpating and just of pushing and rubbing the back, using some fancy stuff, patient is just lying on his stomach, that's not fear reducing. Moving the patient might be much more effective in reducing fear. And addressing expectations is a good idea, and we know from other research, a nice study from Chester on shoulders and Mondloch on total knee replacement. If we somehow manage to twist around the expectation and to make the patient, or to give the patient a better prognosis, the outcome will be better. So an individualized assessment can help with that.
Haben Sie die Übung gemacht, die Ihnen der Therapeut vorgeschlagen hat?
Ich hab's vor, aber zurzeit habe ich Urlaub.
So sometimes you also have some funny findings when you do research. So have you done the exercises? I have in mind, but currently I'm on holiday. Okay. Such a research project is not done just with 1 or 2 persons. A big thank you to the clinics who were involved. And currently our manuscript is under revision. So we submitted it and get a call for a revision, and we did a revision, and currently it's under revision. We hope to publish it this year, and it's our first project actually as a main author, so that's quite a thrilling experience. And cross your fingers that we publish it hopefully this year. So thanks for your attention.
All of your recommendations were just oral, or you combined with some material, some videos for patients, or it was just spoken and without any material for them?
Thanks, Rado. We didn't have standardized materials. What almost all therapists did in this study was when they gave an exercise, they used the smartphone of the patients to record the exercise and give the exercise on video. But we didn't deliver written information in this study. But that is actually one of the recommendations for future studies. If you standardize the information, might make sense. At this point, we started with more an individual view on this, so we went for very individualized information, but no written stuff. Yeah, thanks.
Congratulations for your results.
You should not congratulate on the results.
I just wrote some studies done by psychologists, and I am a physician, so if a patient comes to see me, I have to manage all the history, prescribe drugs, learn some MRI or computer tomography, everything, and tell him something about exercises. So from my point of view, I think that my patients remember maybe 30 to 50%, so I have to continue. So it was amazing, the result.
Yeah.
You just talked about the exercising?
No, we're not talking about, it's not just exercise, it's exercise and information. So in our study we call it piece of advice, which summarizes exercise and information. And actually what you are telling is that's very common. And when you look at communication research with physicians, it's very common that you don't speak the same language, that you are worse with older people, that you're not good in explaining the MRIs. But we as physical therapists are not any better anyway. And I think a good way is really, the easiest thing is to restrict the amount of information and exercise we give to patients. So we all clinicians, we tend to some kind overload our patients. But it's such a new situation. Patient is with us maybe for 20 minutes, half an hour, gets so much input. And at the end, we say, and now you do this, this, and this, and so much gets lost. Yeah. Thank you. Good.